picture this moment with me. You stand in the heart of the Erd Tree, golden light cascading through fractured stone and broken dreams. Before you lies not a god triumphant, but a shattered vessel, a being split in two, hair shifting from gold to red, as if the very essence of divinity wages war against itself. The hammer that once built paradise now lies broken, fragments of the Elden Ring embedded in its head like accusations. This is Radagon. This is Marika. This is the Golden Order laid bare. A perfect system that destroyed itself from within. How did we get here? How did something proclaimed as eternal order, as divine perfection itself, end in such complete devastation? The answer lies not in the shattering that broke the world, but in the very foundation of the Golden Order itself. From its inception, this supposedly perfect system carried the seeds of its own destruction, wrapped in golden promises that could never be kept. To understand the Golden Order's fundamental flaws, we need to go back to the beginning, to a time before golden grace dominated the lands between, when death was not a crime and life was not a chain. We need to speak of what was lost, what was suppressed, and what was sacrificed on the altar of Marika's ambition. Because the Golden Order didn't arise from nothing, it was built on the bones of what came before, and those bones would never stop crying out for justice. Before the Golden Order, the Rune of Death was part of the Elden Ring, wielded as the god-slaying black flame by the gloam, eyed queen who led the godskin apostles on their god hunt until Malekith triumphed over her. The confinement of the Rune of Death marked the beginning of the Golden Order. This single act, this removal of death from the natural order, would become the original sin from which all other corruptions would flow. Let me tell you the story of how paradise became a prison, how immortality became a curse, and how a god's desperate attempt to escape death only ensured that everything she touched would rot from within. This is the tragedy of the Golden Order, a system so afraid of ending that it forgot how to truly live. The removal of death wasn't just a philosophical change. It was a fundamental rewriting of reality itself. Marika envisioned a world without true death, sealing the Rune of Death away and tasking Malekith to guard it. Under the Golden Order, there can never be true death, and all living beings undergo a cycle of reincarnation back to the Erd Tree. Think about what this means. Every soul, every essence of being, becomes trapped in an endless cycle, recycled through the Erd Tree's roots, never allowed the peace of ending, never permitted the dignity of conclusion. But Marika's vision went deeper than mere immortality. She wasn't content to simply remove death. She needed to erase its very memory. The gloam-eyed queen, once a rival Empyrean who wielded the power of destined death, wasn't just defeated. She was obliterated from history. Her apostles, the godskins who wore the flesh of gods as trophies, were scattered and diminished. The black flame that could kill even gods was reduced to a pale shadow of its former glory. In place of natural death came something far more insidious, eternal servitude disguised as eternal life. The Erd Tree burial, that supposedly sacred honor, reveals the true horror of this system. Bodies don't rest, they feed the tree. Souls don't find peace, they're processed and redistributed like resources in some cosmic recycling plant. With its establishment, Marika suppressed the power of her rival and granted immortality to herself and her demigod offspring, the Golden Lineage. But this immortality came at a price that would eventually demand payment in full. Consider the warriors who helped establish this order. Godfrey would lead Marika's armies and wage wars to quell opposition to the Erd Tree, such as the war against the fire giants. Once the last of Marika's enemies fell, the hue from Godfrey's eyes faded, and he was banished from the lands between, divested of grace. The first Elden Lord, the greatest warrior of the age, discarded like a broken tool once his purpose was served. This pattern of use and abandonment would define the Golden Order's relationship with all who served it. Godfrey was once Huara Luke, a brutal chieftain who became the first Elden Lord after submitting to Marika's vision and being given grace. This grace did not purify him, it contained him. Under Marika's command, Godfrey led a campaign of total domination. The transformation of Hoarah into Godfrey represents the Golden Order's methodology in microcosm. Take what is wild and free, chain it with grace, use it for conquest, then discard it when it no longer serves the system. The fire giants, ancient beings who tended the flame that could burn the Erd Tree, were systematically exterminated. Only one was left alive, cursed to guard the very flame that represented the only threat to Marika's power. The irony is suffocating. The last giant, forced to protect the instrument of potential liberation, transformed from enemy into unwilling sentinel. This is how the Golden Order operated, not through complete destruction, but through corruption and control, turning strength against itself. But to truly understand the depths of the Golden Order's betrayal, we need to examine what came before, what was deliberately erased and demonized, the primordial Crucible. Before any beings roamed the world, there was the primordial Crucible, where all life was blended together. The primordial Crucible was the divine essence that became the Erd Tree and the place where all life energy was once blended together. The Crucible represents everything the Golden Order sought to suppress: chaos, change, evolution, the blending of forms and the freedom of transformation. It was close in nature to life itself, and was represented by the reddish tint in primordial gold, the color of homeward yearning. That red gold, that warm color of home and belonging, would be refined into cold, pure gold, stripped of its warmth, stripped of its life. The Crucible was the primordial form of the Erd Tree, existing long ago. Its hue resembled gold with a red tinge, the color of homeward yearning. The Crucible, from which life took many shapes, was seen as sacred. Sacred, until Marika decided it wasn't. Until the Golden Order declared that diversity was impurity, that change was corruption, that the natural blending of life was somehow wrong. The beings touched by the Crucible, the Omens and misbegotten, became living reminders of what the Golden Order sought to forget. A group of people made contact with the Crucible, becoming the chimeric misbegotten. Their presence was a signifier of divinity in ancient times. As Queen Marika's society advanced, signs of the Crucible were increasingly disdained as impurities. Look at how quickly divinity becomes blasphemy when power changes hands. The horns that the horn-scent culture revered as signs of the divine became marks of shame under the Golden Order. Omen. Individuals are connected to the primordial Crucible and are viewed as untouched by the Erd Tree due to their animalistic traits. They face prejudice and have their inhuman appendages removed at birth, usually resulting in death. The treatment of the Omen reveals the Golden Order's cruelty in its starkest form. These are not foreign invaders or cosmic horrors. These are children born to human parents, their only crime being that their bodies remember an older, more primal form of divinity. The civilized response of the Golden Order? Sawing off their horns in infancy, a procedure that most don't survive. Those who do survive are cast into sewers and darkness, treated as living curses rather than living beings. The Omen were banished, and the misbegotten were enslaved by the Erd Tree, which deemed their corrupted appearance to be a punishment. Enslaved, not for any action, not for any choice, but for the simple fact of their existence. The Golden Order, this supposedly perfect system of divine law, institutionalized slavery based on physical appearance, creating a hierarchy of worth based on how closely one adhered to its narrow definition of purity. Even Marika's own children weren't exempt from this cruelty. Morgott and Mohg, twin sons of the God Queen herself, were imprisoned beneath Lendel simply for being born as Omen. Though they were Queen Marika's children, the Omen twins Morgott and Mohg were imprisoned, shackled under the strictest confinement. The shackles used on them weren't ordinary chains, they were magical implements designed to cause pain when the wearer strayed too far from their prison. Marika allowed this. Marika, who removed death to protect her children, condemned 2 of them to living torment for the crime of being born different. The tragic irony of Morgott's character illuminates the Golden Order's psychological violence. Despite everything done to him, despite the imprisonment and shame, Morgott became the Golden Order's most fervent defender. He called himself the last of all kings, standing guard over a tree that would never accept him, protecting a system that deemed his very existence a mistake. This is perhaps the Golden Order's greatest cruelty. It made its victims complicit in their own oppression, convinced them that their suffering was justified, that they deserved their fate. The Crucible Knights, once honored warriors who served Godfrey himself, suffered a similar fate. The chaos of the primordial crucible became contrary to how life ought to be. Through religious and political strength, the Golden Order destroyed the legacy of the crucible, painting it as sacrilegious. These 16 legendary warriors who helped establish Marika's rule were gradually shunned and scattered, their martial prowess that drew from crucible energies recontextualized as primitive and chaotic. In time, the strength shown by these knights, and even their appearance, was seen as chaotic and deserving of scorn. The very powers that once made them invaluable to the Golden Order's expansion became evidence of their unworthiness, once that expansion was complete. They were relics of a transitional period, embarrassing reminders of when the Golden Order needed to dirty its hands with primordial power to establish its dominance. But the Golden Order's control extended beyond the physical realm into the very nature of faith and thought itself. The Golden Order was a governing principle, a religion and a philosophy. It was founded on the principle that Marika was the one true God and was propagated by the Two Fingers. The Two Fingers, these alien entities that claimed to speak for the greater will, became the interpreters of divine mandate. But their interpretations always seemed to align perfectly with maintaining the existing power structure. When Radagon rose to prominence, a new dimension was added to this control: Golden Order Fundamentalism. Golden Order Fundamentalism was a scholarly pursuit that combined intelligence and faith. It attempted to interpret the fundamentals of the Golden Order based on the law of regression and the law of causality. These laws sound profound until you examine them closely. Regression pulls all things back to their origins, to convergence, to sameness. Causality chains all things in predetermined relationships. Together, they form a philosophical prison where deviation is impossible, where everything must return to and serve the singular source, the Golden Order itself. Miquella, who once created fundamentalist incantations to give to his father Radagon, abandoned fundamentalism as it could not treat Malenia's rot. Even Miquella, the most brilliant of the demigods, found fundamentalism ultimately hollow. It could create elaborate theories, beautiful incantations, complex philosophies, but it couldn't solve real problems. It couldn't cure his sister's rot, couldn't free his brother Mohg from his curse, couldn't address any actual suffering that didn't align with its rigid framework. The hunters of those who live in death represent fundamentalism's final form, zealots who abandoned all learning in favor of pursuing absolute evil. Among the Golden Order fundamentalists were the hunters of those who live in death, who abandoned learning in search of an absolute evil to contend with. When your perfect system starts producing people who stop thinking in favor of simply destroying whatever doesn't fit, you've created not order, but organized ignorance. Speaking of those who live in death, their very existence exposed the fundamental lie at the heart of the Golden Order. When the Knight of Black Knives shattered the illusion of immortal divinity, when Godwyn the Golden was murdered by assassins who carved the curse mark of death into his flesh, his soul perished while Ranni's body perished, splitting the mark into two half-wheels. The perfect system revealed its perfect failure. Godwyn's body was interred in the deep-root depths where he mutated into the Prince of Death. The traces of the Rune of Death spread through the great tree roots, taking the form of Deathroot, the source of those who live in death. The Golden Order had removed death, but it couldn't remove the consequences of death denied. Godwyn's soulless body, trapped in a state between life and death, became a cancer spreading through the very roots of the Erd tree. Those who live in death arose not as rebels but as victims, beings caught in the gap between the Golden Order's promise and reality. Those who live in death have refused the call to return to the Erd tree and trespass beyond life's bounds. They exist outside the principles of the Golden Order, and hunters arose to exterminate defiled reason. The Golden Order's response to this crisis of its own making, not to address the fundamental problem, not to restore proper death, but to send out hunters to destroy the evidence of its failure. Those who live in death weren't evil, they were proof that the system was broken, and for that crime they had to be exterminated. The tragedy deepens when you realize that some sought to give these beings dignity. Fia, the deathbed companion, saw in those who live in death not monsters, but outcasts deserving of acceptance. Fia sought to allow Godwyn to claim a second life as the first of the dead, conceiving a rune that would restore death and embed the principle of life within death into the order. Her solution wasn't to destroy death or deny it, but to integrate it, to acknowledge that death and life are partners, not enemies. But this wisdom had no place in the Golden Order's rigid binary of absolute life against absolute void. The persecution extended beyond the obviously different. The great caravan of merchants, people whose only crime was traveling and trading, were buried alive beneath Lendel when they were accused of heretical beliefs. The Nox, the eternal cities, were banished underground for the crime of attempting to create their own fate, to forge a lord not beholden to the greater will. Every group that represented an alternative to the Golden Order's monopoly on truth was systematically suppressed, erased, or corrupted. The ultimate revelation of the Golden Order's hypocrisy comes in the form of Marika herself. Marika shattered the Elden Ring while Radagon tried to repair it. In an echo she speaks, "O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou'rt yet to become me, thou'rt yet to become a god. Let us be shattered both. Mine other self, the god of the Golden Order, the one who established this perfect system, ultimately rebelled against it. Marika and Radagon, two halves of the same being, represent the fundamental split at the heart of the Golden Order itself. One half desperately maintaining the system, the other desperately trying to destroy it. Following the Night of Black Knives, Marika shattered the Elden Ring, breaking the Golden Order. Radagon remained loyal to the Golden Order and attempted to repair the Elden Ring with the same hammer used to shatter it. This isn't just philosophical disagreement, this is a god at war with herself, simultaneously creator and destroyer, order and chaos, trapped in an endless cycle of building and breaking. The Golden Order couldn't even maintain unity within its own divinity. How could it possibly maintain unity across an entire world? The nature of Marika and Radagon's existence raises disturbing questions about the Golden Order's foundation. Evidence suggests that Radagon didn't always exist, that Marika created him, perhaps during the Liurnian Wars when she needed to be in two places at once, perhaps as a way to compartmentalize the parts of herself that fully embraced the Golden Order while other parts began to doubt. If true, this means the god of the Golden Order literally had to split herself in two to maintain the system, had to create an alternate personality to bear the weight of her own creation. As the husband of Rennala, Radagon studied sorcery, and as the husband of Queen Marika, he studied incantations. Thus did the hero aspire to be complete. Radagon's desperate attempt to be complete through learning, through combining faith and intelligence, reads as tragic when you realize he could never be complete, because he was never whole to begin with. He was a fragment trying to become a person, order trying to become divine. The law of regression, one of fundamentalism's core principles, tells us that all things yearn to converge. But what happens when convergence is forced? What happens when the natural diversity of life is hammered into artificial unity? You get the Golden Order, a system that demands everything become one thing, serve one purpose, follow one path. The red gold of the Crucible, representing the warm diversity of life, was refined into cold, sterile gold that permits no variation. The greater will itself, the outer god that supposedly chose Marika and established the Golden Order, abandoned the lands between when the Elden Ring was shattered. The fingers speak of Marika's trespass, demanding a heavy sentence, but even in shackles, she remains a god. The fingers willed that great runes be conferred to become Elden Lord and join Marika as consort. Even in punishment, the system perpetuates itself, seeking a new consort to maintain the same broken order rather than allowing fundamental change. The two fingers, claimed intermediaries of the greater will, continued to give guidance long after their god had departed, their communion taking literally thousands of years while the world burns around them. Their cosmic middle management, maintaining corporate policy long after the CEO has abandoned the company, insisting that the system works while everything collapses around them. The exploration of the Golden Order's failures wouldn't be complete without examining its treatment of knowledge and learning itself. The Academy of Raya Lucaria, representing an alternative magical tradition based on the stars and moon, was first warred against, then politically neutralized through Radagon's marriage to Renala. When that marriage was dissolved for political convenience, Renala was left broken, clutching the amber egg of unborn possibility, driven to madness by the Golden Order's casual cruelty in using and discarding her. Even the Erd Tree itself, that golden symbol of eternal life and divine grace, is revealed to be parasitic in nature. It doesn't give life so much as recycle it, feeding on the souls buried in its roots, growing fat on the essence of the dead who cannot die. The grace that falls from its branches is revealed to be a leash, compelling those touched by it to serve the greater will's purpose, whether they understand it or not. When that purpose is fulfilled, the grace is withdrawn, and the formerly blessed become tarnished, exiled from the lands they bled to conquer. The Golden Order was not a discovery. It was a deliberate construction. This deliberate construction required the systematic destruction of everything that came before, the suppression of every alternative way of being, the persecution of everyone who didn't fit its narrow definition of perfection. It promised eternal life, but delivered eternal servitude. It promised peace, but required endless war to maintain itself. It promised truth, but was built on fundamental lies. The various mending runes that could reshape the Elden Ring at the game's conclusion each represent a different response to the Golden Order's failure. Fia's mending rune of the Death Prince would restore death to the world, acknowledging what the Golden Order tried to deny. The mending rune of Perfect Order, created through Brother Corhin and Goldmask's quest, attempts to remove the fickleness of gods from the equation, creating an order so perfect it doesn't need divine maintenance. The Dung Eater's mending rune of the Fell Curse would spread the Omen curse to all, achieving equality through universal defilement. Each solution recognizes that the Golden Order as it existed was fundamentally unsustainable. But perhaps the most damning indictment of the Golden Order comes from examining what it produced. Look at the demigods, the children of its primary god. Miquella, cursed with eternal youth, abandoned fundamentalism to create his own Halictree, attempting to build a haven for all the Golden Order rejected. Malenia, cursed with scarlet rot, became a weapon of destruction waiting to bloom. Ranni orchestrated the assassination that began the end, choosing to kill her own body rather than serve the system. Rykard fed himself to a god-devouring serpent in blasphemous rebellion. Morgott defended a system that despised him. Mohg sought to create a blood-soaked dynasty in opposition to golden grace. Not a single child of the Golden Age emerged whole. Each was broken in some fundamental way, cursed or corrupted or driven to extremes. This is what the Golden Order produced, broken children fighting over the pieces of a broken system, each trying to reshape the world according to their own trauma. The Golden Lineage, meant to be eternal and perfect, produced only tragedy and conflict. The merchants, entombed beneath the capital, sang songs of the frenzied flame, of chaos that would melt all things back into one. Their madness speaks a terrible truth. If order becomes too rigid, too oppressive, then chaos becomes salvation. The three fingers, representing the frenzied flame, offer an ending where all distinctions are burned away, where the suffering caused by division and hierarchy is ended through universal destruction. That this seemed like a reasonable alternative to some shows how unbearable the Golden Order's tyranny had become. We can see elements of Marika's tribe in the Golden Order, starting with the bodies that nourish her Erd tree. Marika made use of all the knowledge learned from her clan, starting with sacrificing her very own family to become a goddess. The revelation that Marika herself might have been from the shamans, a people sacrificed and used by others, adds another layer of tragedy. The oppressed became the oppressor, the victim became the victimizer, perpetuating cycles of violence and suppression that she herself had suffered under. The Golden Order promised to be different from what came before, to be better, purer, more perfect. But in the end, it was just another system of control, another hierarchy of worth, another cycle of violence dressed in prettier colors. Gold doesn't make oppression noble. Divine mandate doesn't make cruelty righteous. Eternal life doesn't mean anything if that life is spent in chains, whether those chains are made of gold or grace or simple fear. As we stand again before Radagon's broken form, as we see Marika's imprisonment within the Erd tree she was supposed to rule, we understand that the Golden Order was always doomed to fail. Any system built on the suppression of natural order, on the denial of fundamental truths like death and change, on the persecution of difference and the enforcement of uniformity, carries within itself the seeds of its own destruction. The Golden Order didn't fall because of external threats or cosmic interference. It fell because it was built on lies, sustained by violence, and maintained through oppression. The Shattering wasn't the breaking of something perfect. It was the inevitable collapse of something that was always broken, always flawed, always unsustainable. Marika knew this. Part of her always knew this. That's why she shattered the Elden Ring, why she rebelled against her own creation. Because sometimes the only way to fix something so fundamentally flawed is to break it completely and start over. The tarnished, called back to the lands between to claim the throne, inherits not a kingdom but a catastrophe, not a crown but a choice. Will they perpetuate the Golden Order's mistakes in a new form? Will they try to perfect what cannot be perfected? Or will they have the wisdom to recognize that true order cannot be imposed from above but must grow from below? That diversity is not impurity but strength. That death is not the enemy but the partner of life. By the time the player reaches the Erd tree and sees it sealed, the truth is laid bare. The Golden Order was never eternal. It was just one version of control, crafted by gods who feared rebellion, death, and uncertainty. The Golden Order's greatest lie was that it was necessary, that without it, the world would descend into chaos. But the world had existed before it, with the Crucible's primal vitality, with the dragon's ancient sovereignty, with countless other orders and systems. And the world would exist after it, shaped by whatever new order the Tarnished chose to impose or refuse to impose. In the end, the Golden Order's rise and fall teaches us about the danger of any system that claims perfection, that demands uniformity, that denies fundamental aspects of existence. It shows us that power corrupts not just those who wield it, but the very systems built to maintain it. It reminds us that immortality without freedom is just an elaborate prison, that order without justice is just organized oppression, that divinity without compassion is just tyranny with better PR. The golden light that streams through the Erd tree's bark isn't warm like sunlight. It's cold, sterile, the light of preservation rather than life. The Golden Order preserved everything and nurtured nothing. It stopped time rather than moving with it. It denied death and, in doing so, denied life its meaning. It sought to be eternal and unchanging in a universe built on cycles and transformation. Every empire tells itself it will last forever. Every system of power convinces itself it's the final answer. The Golden Order was no different, except in the scope of its ambition and the completeness of its failure. It tried to be not just a government or a religion, but reality itself, the fundamental law by which all things operated. But reality is bigger than any one order, older than any one god, more complex than any one system can contain. As the Erd-tree burns in the distance, as the golden light fades to reveal the stars it had hidden, as the roots that trap souls finally release them, we see the truth. The Golden Order was never golden at all. It was guilt, a thin coating of beauty over a core of control. Scratch the surface and you find the suffering. Dig deeper and you find the lies. At its heart, you find a God so broken by her own creation that she had to destroy it to find any peace. The greater will has abandoned the lands between. The two fingers speak only in echoes of ancient commands. The demigods war over fragments of a broken ring. The Erd-tree seals itself against all who would enter. These aren't signs of a system in crisis. They're signs of a system that has already ended. Only no one wants to admit it. The Golden Order hasn't fallen. It's falling, eternally. Everyone scrambling to prop up what has already collapsed, to restore what was never whole. But perhaps there's hope in that falling. Perhaps in the space between what was and what will be, in the chaos between orders, there's room for something genuinely new to grow. Not another Golden Order with a different coat of paint. Not another system of control with different controllers, but something that acknowledges the lessons of this monumental failure. Something that embraces death as part of life, chaos as part of order, difference as strength rather than weakness. The tarnish stands at the threshold of godhood, holding the power to reshape reality itself. But the greatest wisdom might be in refusing to use that power as previous gods have, in breaking the cycle rather than perpetuating it. The Golden Order's greatest flaw wasn't in its specific rules or structures, but in its fundamental belief that any single order could or should govern all existence. Life is messy. Death is necessary. Change is constant. Diversity is strength. These aren't flaws to be corrected, but truths to be accepted. The Golden Order failed because it tried to deny these truths, to impose its will on the very nature of existence. It confused control with order, uniformity with unity, suppression with peace. As we conclude this examination of the Golden Order's rise and fundamental flaws, we're left not with answers, but with warnings. Warning against any system that claims to have all the answers. Warning against any order that demands absolute conformity. Warning against any power that denies fundamental aspects of existence. The Golden Order was meant to be eternal, perfect, unquestionable. It lasted an age and left only ruin in its wake. The golden light fades. The tree's roots wither. The ring remains shattered. And in that shattering, in that ending, perhaps we find the only truth the Golden Order ever accidentally taught, that all things end, all orders fail, all systems collapse. The question isn't whether they will fall, but what we'll build from their ruins, and whether we'll have learned enough to build something better, or merely different. In the lands between, covered in the ashes of a burned Erd-tree, sprouting with the death root of denied mortality, scarred by the wars of would-be gods, we see the price of perfection pursued. The Golden Order promised paradise and delivered purgatory. It promised unity and created division. It promised eternal life and created eternal suffering. Its rise was built on the suppression of all that came before. Its reign was maintained through violence against all who didn't conform. Its fall was inevitable from the moment it began, encoded in its very foundation. The Golden Order's fundamental flaw was that it was fundamental, that it tried to be the base code of reality rather than one system among many, one order among chaos, one answer among questions. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Golden Order's tragic rise and inevitable fall, please like and subscribe to King Lore for more comprehensive explorations of gaming's most fascinating lore and stories. Until next time, remember, in the lands between, as in all worlds, the only golden rule that matters is that there are no golden rules, only choices and consequences, only orders that rise and inevitably fall.